25 years old, work as a security guard in Chicago, Illinois, and make about $36,000 a year. I've been working security for about 3 years now, mostly doing overnight shifts at various locations. Shopping malls, office buildings, construction sites. Nothing too crazy, usually pretty boring work. In October 2024, my company assigned me to a new contract, a large warehouse on the south side, about 10 miles from downtown. The warehouse was used for storage by some distribution company. During the day, there were workers loading and unloading trucks, moving inventory around. But at night, it was completely empty except for me. The building was massive, maybe 200,000 square feet. High ceilings, rows and rows of tall metal shelving units stacked with pallets, forklifts parked in various spots. There were security cameras throughout, but they were old, and the footage was grainy at best. My shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 7 days a week for the first month, until they could hire a second guard to split the schedule. The pay was decent for overtime, so I didn't complain. The first week was uneventful. I'd do my rounds every hour, walking through the warehouse with my flashlight, checking doors, making sure everything was secure. The rest of the time, I'd sit in the small security office near the front entrance, watching the camera feeds and scrolling through my phone. The warehouse had a strange layout. The main floor where most of the inventory was stored, a second level that was really just a mezzanine with offices and a break room, and a basement level that was mostly empty except for old equipment and the building's mechanical systems. On my 8th night there, something happened that made me realize this job wasn't going to be as simple as I thought. It was around 1 a.m. I was sitting in the security office, half watching the cameras, half watching a video on my phone. One of the camera feeds, the one covering the far back corner of the warehouse, flickered and went black. I looked at the screen. The feed was dead, just static. I figured it was a technical issue. The cameras were old and I'd been told they went out occasionally. I made a note in my log and decided I'd check it during my next round. About 30 minutes later, I started my hourly patrol. I grabbed my flashlight and walked into the main warehouse floor. It was dark except for a few overhead lights that stayed on for safety. The ceiling was so high that the lights barely illuminated the ground level, leaving most of the space in shadow. I walked down the main aisle toward the back corner, where the camera had gone out. The warehouse was completely silent, except for the sound of my boots on the concrete floor. As I got closer to the back corner, I noticed something odd. One of the motion sensor lights had turned on. These lights only activated when they detected movement, but I was still about 50 feet away. I stopped walking and shined my flashlight toward the light. I couldn't see anyone, just rows of shelving units and stacked pallets. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No response, just silence. I continued walking toward the motion light, keeping my flashlight pointed ahead. When I reached the area, the light turned off, as if whoever or whatever had triggered it had moved away. I searched the area, checked behind shelving units, looked under pallets, nothing. Nobody was there. I found the camera that had gone out. It was hanging by its wires, like someone had yanked it off the mount. But there was no ladder nearby, and the camera was at least 12 feet off the ground. There was no way someone could have reached it without equipment. I reported it in my log and continued my patrol. The rest of the night was quiet. The next night, the same camera went out again, this time at around midnight. And again, when I went to check it during my patrol, a motion light in that same back corner had turned on. I was starting to feel uneasy. This wasn't a coincidence. On the 3rd night, I decided to go to that back corner immediately when the camera went out, instead of waiting for my scheduled patrol. Maybe I could catch whoever was doing this. At 12:45 a.m., the camera feed went black. I grabbed my flashlight and quickly walked to the back corner. I moved fast, trying to be quiet. As I approached, I saw the motion light was on, and this time, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was someone standing in the aisle between 2 shelving units, just standing there, facing away from me. It was a man, average height, wearing dark clothes. He wasn't moving, just standing there in the dim light from above. "Hey!" I shouted. "This is private property. You need to leave." The man didn't respond, didn't turn around, didn't move at all. I reached for my radio to call the police, but then the man started walking. Not away from me, but deeper into the warehouse, disappearing between the shelving units. I followed him, shining my flashlight ahead. "Stop! I'm calling the police." I turned the corner where he'd gone, but he wasn't there. The aisle was empty. I walked down the aisle, checking left and right at each intersection. He couldn't have gotten far, but he was nowhere. I spent the next 30 minutes searching that entire section of the warehouse. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished. I went back to the security office and called my supervisor. I told him what happened. He said he'd send someone to check it out in the morning, but for now, just to finish my shift and be careful. I checked the camera recordings. The footage from the working cameras showed me walking through the warehouse, but there was no sign of anyone else. The man I'd seen wasn't on camera. The rest of the night, I stayed in the security office. I kept my eyes on the camera feeds, but nothing unusual happened. The next morning, my supervisor came by with another guard. We searched the entire warehouse, checked every door, every window, every possible entry point. Everything was locked and secure. There was no sign of a break-in. My supervisor said it was probably my imagination, that working alone at night can play tricks on your mind. But I knew what I saw. The following week, things escalated. I started hearing sounds during my shifts. Footsteps, metal clanging, voices whispering, though I could never make out what they were saying. Every night, the same camera in the back corner would go out. And every night, motion lights would turn on in areas where I wasn't. I started feeling like I was being watched, like someone was following me during my patrols, staying just out of sight. One night, I was walking through the basement level during my rounds. It was the part of my patrol I hated most. The basement was dark, damp, and filled with old machinery that created strange shadows. As I was walking down a corridor, my flashlight started flickering. Then it went out completely. I was in total darkness. I tried to turn my flashlight back on, but it was dead. Brand new batteries, and it just died. I used my phone's flashlight instead. The dim light barely illuminated a few feet in front of me. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, heavy boots on concrete, coming from behind me. I spun around, shining my phone's light down the corridor. Nobody was there. The footsteps stopped. I stood there, frozen, listening. Silence. Then the footsteps started again, this time in front of me. I turned back around. Still nobody. I walked as quickly as I could toward the stairwell, not running, but moving fast. The footsteps followed me, sometimes behind me, sometimes beside me, echoing off the walls. I reached the stairs and ran up to the main floor. As soon as I got out of the basement, the footsteps stopped. I went straight to the security office and locked the door. I called my supervisor and told him I needed to leave. I couldn't do this anymore. He convinced me to finish the shift, promising he'd have someone come help me the next night. The next night, another guard named Marcus came to work with me. I told him everything that had been happening. He seemed skeptical, but said he'd keep an open mind. Around 2 a.m., we were both in the security office when the back corner camera went out again. "There," I said. "See? It happens every night." Marcus looked at the screen. "Yeah, that's weird. Let's go check it out together." We both walked to the back corner. As we approached, motion lights started turning on, one after another, deeper into the warehouse, like someone was walking ahead of us, triggering each light. "You seeing this?" I asked Marcus. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's not normal." We followed the lights. They led us to a section of the warehouse I rarely went to, an area that was mostly empty shelving. At the end of the aisle, we found something disturbing. A sleeping bag, some food wrappers, empty water bottles. Someone had been living in the warehouse. "There's a squatter," Marcus said. "That explains everything." We searched the area, but didn't find anyone. We called the police. When the officers arrived, they searched the entire warehouse with us. They found 2 more makeshift campsites in different sections of the building, but no sign of anyone actually present. One of the officers said squatters were common in large warehouses. They'd find ways to break in, hide during the day, and come out at night. But here's what doesn't make sense. We'd checked every entry point. Everything was locked and secure. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere. The police said the squatter probably had a key or knew a way in that we hadn't found yet. They recommended we change all the locks and do a more thorough security assessment. My company decided to end the contract with that warehouse. They said it wasn't worth the liability. I was relieved. I never wanted to go back there again. But what still bothers me is that we never found anyone. The police searched for hours and found nothing. No person, no way in or out, just those campsites. And I'll never forget seeing that man standing in the aisle. The way he didn't respond when I yelled. The way he just walked away and disappeared. I've worked security for 3 years. I've dealt with break-ins, trespassers, drunk people, but nothing has ever scared me like that warehouse. Because I don't think it was just a squatter. I think something else was in that building, something that wanted us to know it was there. I still work security, but I'll never take another warehouse job again. And I'll never work alone in a building that big. Some places aren't meant to be empty at night, and some things that hide in the darkness aren't human. I'm 28 years old, work as a security guard in Detroit, Michigan, and make about $42,000 a year. I've been in security for about 5 years, and I've worked at a lot of different locations. Office buildings, retail stores, parking structures. But the job that scared me the most was at an old hospital on the east side of Detroit. The hospital had been partially shut down for years. Only 2 floors were still operational, the ER on the first floor and the ICU on the second floor. The rest of the building, floors 3 through 8, had been closed since 2019. Budget cuts, declining patient numbers, that sort of thing. But the building was still owned by the hospital system, and they needed security to protect the closed floors from vandalism and theft. That's where I came in. I worked the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., Thursday through Monday. My job was to patrol the closed floors every hour, check for any signs of break-ins, and monitor the security cameras. The closed floors were eerie. Hospital beds still in some rooms, medical equipment left behind, that sterile hospital smell mixed with dust and decay. It felt frozen in time, like everyone had just walked out one day and never came back. The first few weeks were fine, quiet, boring even. I'd do my rounds, see nothing, go back to the security office and watch TV on my phone. The security office was on the first floor, near the ER entrance. I had access to the camera feeds from all 8 floors, though many of the cameras on the closed floors didn't work anymore. This all changed in November 2024. It was a Thursday night, around 1 a.m. I was doing my hourly patrol, starting on the 8th floor and working my way down. The 8th floor had been the maternity ward. Empty nursery rooms, a nurse's station, patient rooms with old cribs still inside. As I was walking down the hallway, I heard something that made me stop. A baby crying. I stood there, listening. The sound was faint, but definitely there. A baby's cry, coming from somewhere on the floor. I walked toward the sound. It was coming from one of the patient rooms at the end of the hall. The door was closed. I opened it slowly. The room was dark except for the light from my flashlight. There was an old hospital bed, a chair, a crib in the corner. No baby. But the crying continued. It sounded like it was coming from inside the room, but I couldn't see anything. I walked around the room, checking behind the curtain, looking in the small bathroom. Nothing. Then the crying stopped. Just suddenly stopped, like someone had turned it off. I stood there in the silence, my heart pounding. I told myself it must have been the ventilation system or pipes making noise. Old buildings make strange sounds. I left the room and continued my patrol. The rest of the night was quiet. The next night, the same thing happened. Around 1 a.m., during my patrol on the 8th floor, I heard a baby crying. Same location, same room. This time, I didn't go in. I just stood in the hallway, listening. After about a minute, it stopped. I reported it to my supervisor the next morning. He said it was probably just building sounds, that closed hospitals always have weird acoustics. But he seemed uncomfortable when I told him it was the maternity ward. On Saturday night, things got worse. I was doing my 2 a.m. patrol on the 6th floor this time. The 6th floor had been general patient rooms. Most of the rooms were empty, just bare walls and floors. As I was walking down the main corridor, I saw something at the far end. A figure standing in the hallway, facing away from me. It looked like a woman in a hospital gown. She was just standing there, completely still. "Hello?" I called out. "This area is closed. You need to go back to the ER." The figure didn't move, didn't respond. I started walking toward her, my hand on my radio, ready to call for help if needed. "Ma'am, you can't be up here. I need you to come with me." I was about 20 feet away when the figure started walking, not toward me or away from me, but toward one of the patient rooms. She walked through the doorway and disappeared inside. I reached the room and looked in. It was empty. No woman, no hospital gown, nothing. I searched the room thoroughly. There was nowhere to hide. The room was completely bare. I checked the other rooms on that floor, all empty. I went back to the security office and checked the camera feed for the 6th floor. The camera for that hallway wasn't working, so there was no footage. I called my supervisor and told him what happened. He seemed annoyed, like I was wasting his time. He said if I saw someone again, to call the police, not him. The rest of that night, I didn't leave the security office. I watched the camera feeds, but nothing else happened. On Sunday night, I brought another guard with me. His name was Terrell, and he'd been working security for over 10 years. I told him everything that had been happening. He listened, but didn't seem too concerned. Old hospitals are creepy, man. Your mind plays tricks on you, but I'll walk with you tonight. We'll see if anything happens. We started our midnight patrol together. We took the elevator to the 8th floor and started walking through the maternity ward. As we walked past the nurse's station, we both heard it, a baby crying. Terrell stopped. "You hear that?" "Yeah, it's coming from down the hall." We walked toward the sound. It was the same room as before. The door was closed. Terrell opened it and we both walked in. The crying was louder now, definitely coming from inside the room. "Where is that coming from?" Terrell said, shining his flashlight around. We searched the entire room. The crying continued for about 2 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Terrell looked at me. "Okay, that was weird. But there's got to be an explanation. Maybe speakers left over from when this was operational?" We checked the walls, the ceiling. No speakers, no equipment that could make that sound. We left the room and continued our patrol. On the 6th floor, we both saw the woman in the hospital gown. She was standing at the end of the hallway, just like before. "Hey!" Terrell shouted. "You need to leave!" The woman didn't move. We walked toward her. As we got closer, she turned and walked into a patient room. We ran to the room. She wasn't there. Terrell checked his radio. "This is Unit 12. We need police backup on the 6th floor. We have an intruder." Within 15 minutes, 2 Detroit PD officers arrived. We explained what we saw. They searched the entire 6th floor with us. Every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. They found nothing. One of the officers said, "You guys sure you saw someone? These old buildings can mess with your head." "We both saw her," I said. "Clear as day." The officers left after about an hour. They said if we saw anything else, to call them back. Terrell and I went back to the security office. We were both shaken. "I've worked security for 10 years, Terrell said. "I've never seen anything like that." "Should we finish the shift?" I asked. "We need the money, but we're staying right here. No more patrols tonight." We sat in the security office until 7 a.m., watching the camera feeds. Around 4 a.m., one of the cameras on the 8th floor picked up something. A figure walking down the hallway. It looked like a woman in a hospital gown. She walked past the camera, turned a corner, and disappeared. We watched the recording over and over. It was definitely someone. But we'd searched that floor. There was nobody there. The next morning, I talked to the hospital administrator. I told her everything. The crying baby, the woman in the gown, the police search that found nothing. She looked uncomfortable. "I'll be honest with you. You're not the first guard to report these things. We've had 3 guards quit in the past year because of similar experiences. Why didn't anyone tell me?" We didn't want to scare off potential employees. Security is hard to staff for overnight shifts. "Has anyone investigated this? Like, looked into the history of the building?" She hesitated. "There were some incidents years ago, before the floors were closed. A patient death that was questionable, and a baby that went missing from the nursery, though they found her a few hours later." "What kind of incidents?" "I don't have all the details, but some staff members reported seeing things, hearing things. The hospital decided it was easier to close those floors than deal with the liability. I quit that night. I couldn't work there anymore, knowing that I wasn't the first to experience this, and that the hospital knew about it but didn't warn me." Terrell quit too. He said he'd worked in enough creepy places to know when something wasn't right, and that hospital wasn't right. I heard later that the hospital had trouble keeping security guards for that position. Most quit within a month. I don't know what was in that building. Ghosts, residual energy, something else entirely. But I know what I saw and heard wasn't natural. The woman in the hospital gown, the crying baby, they were real. Maybe not alive, but real. I still work security, but I'll never work in a hospital again, especially not one with closed floors and a history that no one wants to talk about. Because some buildings hold on to things, memories, trauma, whatever you want to call it. And working alone at night in a place like that makes you vulnerable to experiencing things that most people never will. Things that will make you question everything you thought you knew about what's possible. And things that will follow you home, haunting your thoughts long after you've left the building. I still hear that baby crying sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to sleep. And I still see that woman in the hospital gown, standing at the end of dark hallways in my dreams. Some jobs aren't worth the money, and that hospital job was one of them. I'm 31 years old, work as a security guard in Los Angeles, California, and make about $48,000 a year. I've been working security since I got out of the military 6 years ago. Mostly corporate buildings, nothing too exciting. But what happened at one particular office building in downtown LA changed how I look at this job. The building was 42 stories tall, all glass and steel, built in the 1980s. During the day, it housed maybe 20 different companies, law firms, tech startups, financial advisors, that kind of thing. At night, it was completely empty except for the security staff. There were 3 guards on the overnight shift. Me, working floors 1 to 14. A guy named Carlos, working floors 15 to 28. And a woman named Janet, working floors 29 to 42, plus the roof access. We each had a section to patrol, and we'd communicate via radio throughout the night. The shift was 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., 7 days a week, rotating, so we each got 2 days off per week. I'd been working there for about 2 months when things started getting strange. It started with the elevators. The building had 6 elevators, all programmed to stay on the ground floor when not in use after business hours. But several times during my shift, I'd notice elevators moving, going up to different floors, stopping, then coming back down. Empty. At first I thought maybe Carlos or Janet were using them, but when I'd radio to ask, they'd say no. They were on their floors, doing their patrols on foot via the stairwells like we were supposed to. The building manager said it was probably a programming glitch. The elevators were old and occasionally acted up. They'd send a tech to look at it. But the elevator issue continued. Every night, multiple times per night, elevators would move on their own, going to random floors, opening and closing their doors, then returning to the ground floor. Then one night in December 2024, something happened that made me realize this wasn't just a technical issue. I was doing my 1 a.m. patrol, walking through the 9th floor. This floor was occupied by a law firm. Big reception area, rows of offices, conference rooms, all empty and dark, except for emergency lighting. As I was walking past one of the conference rooms, I saw something through the glass wall. Someone was sitting at the conference table. I stopped and looked closer. It was a man in a business suit, sitting at the head of the table, hands folded in front of him, just sitting there in the dark. My first thought was that it was an employee working late, but it was 1 a.m. and I hadn't seen anyone come in. I knocked on the glass. "Excuse me, sir. The building is closed." The man didn't move, didn't turn to look at me, just kept sitting there. I opened the conference room door. "Sir, you need to leave. The building is closed to non-security personnel." The man still didn't respond. I walked closer, shining my flashlight on him. As I got within a few feet, I realized something was wrong. The man was completely still, not breathing, not moving at all. He looked off, like his features were blurry, indistinct. I reached out to touch his shoulder, and my hand went through him. Not like he wasn't solid, but like he wasn't there at all. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. The man just sat there, unchanged. I backed out of the conference room and radioed Carlos and Janet. "Hey, either of you seeing anything weird tonight?" Carlos responded. "No, why?" Never mind. Let me know if you see anything unusual." I went back to look in the conference room. The man was gone. The chair where he'd been sitting was empty. I searched the entire floor, every office, every bathroom, every closet. Nobody was there. I reported it to the building manager the next day. He seemed skeptical, but said he'd check the access logs. Nobody had entered or exited the building during my shift, except the 3 guards. Over the next week, I saw the man 2 more times, always in conference rooms, always sitting at a table, always disappearing when I tried to approach him. Carlos and Janet started reporting their own experiences. Carlos said he'd heard voices on the 23rd floor, like people having a conversation. But when he went to investigate, nobody was there. Janet said she'd seen someone standing on the roof one night, a woman in business attire standing near the edge. When Janet approached her, she vanished. The three of us started comparing notes. We realized that most of our experiences were happening on specific floors. The 9th floor where I kept seeing the man, the 23rd floor where Carlos heard voices, and the 35th floor where Janet saw the woman. We did some research. We found old news articles about the building. In 1995, a lawyer had jumped from the 9th floor conference room window after losing a major case. In 2003, there was a murder-suicide on the 23rd floor, a domestic dispute between co-workers. And in 2011, a woman had jumped from the roof after being fired from her job on the 35th floor. 3 deaths, 3 floors, 3 ghosts. We presented this information to the building manager. He didn't seem surprised. He admitted that other guards had reported similar experiences over the years, but the building's owners didn't want it publicized for fear of losing tenants. "So you knew about this?" I asked. "Yes, but what am I supposed to do? The building is profitable. The owners won't shut it down because of ghost stories." "These aren't ghost stories. We're all seeing things, real things." "I believe you, but my hands are tied. If you don't feel comfortable working here, you're welcome to transfer to another site." Carlos transferred immediately. He said he couldn't work in a building where the management knew it was haunted but didn't care. Janet and I stayed. We needed the money, and honestly, the experiences weren't threatening, just unsettling. But then something happened that changed everything. It was a Friday night in January 2025. I was doing my 3 a.m. patrol on the 9th floor. As I walked past the conference room where I'd seen the man before, I heard something. Tapping, like someone tapping on glass. I looked into the conference room. The man was there again, sitting at the table. But this time, he was looking at me, and he was tapping on the table with his finger. Slow, deliberate taps. I stood there, frozen. The man raised his hand and pointed at me. Then he pointed toward the windows. I followed his gesture. The windows overlooked downtown LA, the city lights spreading out below. Then the man stood up and walked toward the window. He pressed his hands against the glass and looked down. I realized what he was showing me. He was reenacting his death, showing me what happened. I backed away from the conference room, my heart pounding. The man turned to look at me one more time. Then he stepped through the window and disappeared. I ran to the window. Of course the glass was intact, but I felt sick thinking about what he'd shown me. I radioed Janet. "I need you to come to the 9th floor, now." She arrived a few minutes later. I told her what happened. "He's trying to communicate," she said. "Maybe he needs something." "Like what?" "I don't know. Closure? Recognition? Maybe he just wants someone to acknowledge what happened to him." We decided to do some research. We found the lawyer's name, Thomas Brennan. He'd lost a high-profile case in 1995, then jumped from the 9th floor. His family had tried to sue the law firm for wrongful death, claiming the work environment was abusive, but the case was dismissed. Janet had an idea. What if we acknowledge him? Like, actually talk to him, tell him we know what happened. The next night, I went to the conference room at 3 a.m. The man was there, sitting at the table. I walked in and stood at the doorway. "Thomas Brennan, I know who you are. I know what happened. I'm sorry for what you went through." The man looked at me. For the first time, his features became clear. I could see his face, his eyes. He looked sad, tired. "I can't change what happened," I continued. "But I want you to know that you're not forgotten. Someone knows your story." The man nodded slowly. Then he stood up and walked toward me. I fought the urge to back away. He stopped a few feet from me and said, in a voice that sounded far away, "Thank you." Then he faded away, and I never saw him again. Janet and Carlos did the same on their floors, acknowledged the people who had died, spoke their names, told them they were remembered. The experiences stopped after that. No more ghosts in conference rooms, no more voices on empty floors, no more figures on the roof. The building felt different, less heavy, like something had lifted. I still work there. The job pays well, and honestly, after everything that happened, I feel like I have a duty to stay. to make sure those people aren't forgotten. Because I learned something important from that experience. Ghosts aren't always scary. Sometimes they're just lost, stuck, waiting for someone to acknowledge their pain. And sometimes the scariest part of working security isn't the ghosts. It's the people in charge who know about them but don't care, who value profit over the well-being of their employees, who let guards walk into situations without warning them what they might face. That's the real horror, not the supernatural, but the indifference of the living. I think about Thomas Brennan sometimes, about how desperate he must have been to take his own life, how trapped he must have felt, both when he was alive and after he died. I'm glad I could give him some peace, even if it was 30 years too late. That's what being a security guard really is. It's not just protecting property. Sometimes it's protecting memory, making sure that the people who were here before us aren't erased, even the ones who are no longer alive.